I walked into my brother's engagement party. The bride whispered with a sneer, "The stinky country girl is here." She didn't know I owned the hotel, or that the bride's family was about to learn it the bloody way. The moment I stepped through the grand doors of the Monarch Hotel ballroom, I heard it. The whisper was laced with venom and perfectly audible over the hushed jazz music. Sloane Whitmore, my brother Garrett's fiancée, stood like a statue of icy perfection, leaning conspiratorially toward her bridesmaids. Her dismissal of me was instantaneous, a calculated performance intended for maximum public humiliation. I was Rosalie, the embarrassment who had crawled out of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, to ruin the aesthetic of her perfect evening. I was utterly insignificant to her. Sloane had no idea that every gilded fixture, every crystal chandelier, and every square inch of Italian marble beneath her ridiculously overpriced heels belonged to me. I had signed the deed to the Monarch Hotel 3 years ago. This flagship property was the culmination of everything I had built since leaving home at 18, with $200 and a suitcase. By the end of this night, that cruel whisper was going to cost her everything she thought she was gaining. My name is Rosalie, and I am 31 years old. My history in Millbrook was simple. I was the rough draft to Garrett's masterpiece. If I succeeded, he had succeeded better. My mother, Patricia, had a way of looking at me that confirmed I was a perpetual disappointment. I left home with a single, burning goal, a stubborn refusal to fail. I didn't immediately become a CEO. For the first 2 years in the city, the family rumors were true. I was struggling and eating instant noodles in a cramped apartment. What they didn't know was that I took a job as a cleaning lady at a boutique hotel. I didn't hate the work, I studied it. I learned the business from the ground up, watching, saving every penny, and making strategic investments. By 28, I owned my first property. Now, at 31, I run Birch Hospitality, a multi-million-dollar company that owns 6 hotels. The Monarch is my pride and joy. The key to my success, and my most powerful weapon, was silence. People underestimate you when they think they know your limit. My family never asked about my life, so I never told them. In their eyes, I was still the striving little sister, incapable of measuring up to Garrett, their golden child, who held a middle management job at an insurance firm. The irony was a physical weight in the room. I stood there in my best jeans and favorite boots, an outfit that likely cost more than Sloane's entire ensemble. Though you wouldn't know it by looking. Real money doesn't need to scream. Though I left the farm, the work ethic stayed, and now it translated directly to my bank account. I spotted my mother holding court, no doubt bragging about Garrett and his perfect fiancée. Garrett himself looked like a man who had won the lottery, completely oblivious that his ticket was about to be voided. Sloane finally glanced my way, her smile sharp and insincere. She didn't recognize me as anything other than a social inconvenience. That was fine. Let her think I was nobody. I had learned that the best revenge is patient and quiet. It's watching people dig their own graves, while they're too busy looking down on you to see the shovel. I smiled back at Sloane, walked to the bar, and ordered a drink. Wesley Crane, my general manager, caught my eye from across the room and gave a subtle, professional nod. My staff knew not to acknowledge me. Everything was running perfectly, exactly as it should be, because in 3 hours, Sloane Whitmore was going to learn a critical lesson. Never underestimate the country girl, especially when she owns the ground you are standing on. After the initial sting of Sloane's insult, I settled into a corner, observing the extravagance of the party in the hotel I paid for. The silence didn't last long. My mother, Patricia, found me approaching with the hesitant gait of someone smelling something unpleasant. She looked me up and down, her disapproval settling heavily on my favorite boots. "It is nice that you could make it, Rosalie," she began, though her tone suggested the opposite. "But could you not have worn something more appropriate? Sloane's family is very refined." She stressed the word, clearly implying I was not. I explained that I came straight from work and hadn't had time to change, which was technically true. I just omitted that work meant running a multi-million-dollar corporation. Patricia sighed. The familiar sound that always made me feel like I was 12 years old again, failing some impossible, unstated standard. She told me to at least try to make a good impression on the Whitmores, then melted back into the crowd. 20 seconds. And I was instantly relegated to the role of the constant family disappointment. I spotted Garrett making his way toward me, weaving through the top decorations. He looked harried but happy. He said he was glad I came, but his eyes were already scanning the room for more important guests. Some things truly never changed. He asked if I had met Sloane yet, calling her amazing. I simply said I had seen her and kept my mounting opinions to myself. Then he dropped the first bomb. "You know, Mom gave Sloane Grandma's necklace as an engagement gift," he said, beaming. "Wasn't that generous of her? Sloane absolutely loves it." I felt the air evacuate my lungs. Grandma's necklace. The antique pendant our grandmother had promised specifically to me before she died. She had held my hand and said it was for her dreamer, her fighter, the one who would make something of herself. Patricia had been in the room when that promise was made, and she had given it to Sloane anyway. My inheritance, my most cherished memory, was now sparkling around the neck of the woman who had just called me the stinky country girl. The betrayal was swift and profound. Just as the personal anger peaked, the plot changed. Needing air, I headed toward the service entrance. As I passed a quiet corridor, I heard hushed, stressed voices. Franklin Whitmore, Sloane's father, was pressed against the wall, phone to his ear, his face tight with panic. "He didn't notice me. They need this wedding to happen," he hissed into the phone. "The Burns family has money enough to cover our situation. We just need to get through the ceremony, and after that, everything works out." He hung up, the confident salesman mask immediately sliding back into place, and walked back toward the party. I stood frozen in the hallway, the memory of the necklace momentarily forgotten, replaced by something much colder and more urgent. The Burns family had money. What money? I knew for a fact my parents' house had a second mortgage because I had been secretly paying it off for the last 4 years. Garrett's job was decent, nothing more. There was no family fortune. Why did Franklin Whitmore think there was? And what exactly was this situation that needed covering? The protective instinct immediately replaced the sting of betrayal, shifting my focus from personal injury to an undeniable threat to my entire family. Franklin's desperate phone call had turned the evening from a personal slight into a full-blown threat. I spent the next hour watching the Whitmores like a hawk. Every smile, every gesture from Sloane and her parents felt rehearsed. Now that I knew something was wrong, I could see the cracks in their performance. Franklin kept checking his phone, his jaw tight. Delilah, Sloane's mother, nervously touched her expensive jewelry, as if afraid it might suddenly vanish. Sloane herself had a frantic hunger in her eyes that had nothing to do with love. I started piecing together why they believed the Burns family had money. For the past 4 years, I had anonymously sent money to my parents through my company, Birch Hospitality. The payments covered the mortgage, utilities, and medical expenses, but I never put my name on them. I didn't want their questions or their gratitude, I just wanted to help from a distance. But my mother, Patricia, had needed a narrative. Naturally, she decided the generous, successful son must be Garrett. I could almost hear her bragging to her friends about his investments and how he always looked after his family. I sent the money, made the sacrifices, and Garrett got the credit. The Whitmores had clearly done their homework. They saw a nice house with no visible mortgage payments. They heard Patricia bragging about her son's supposed success. They targeted Garrett, believing he was sitting on hidden wealth, a shark smelling blood in the water. But the money was a mirage. There was no family fortune. The Whitmores were chasing a ghost, and when the truth came out, my family would be devastated by the fallout. I found Wesley Crane near the service entrance, overseeing the catering staff with his usual composure. He was the one person in the building who knew my true identity, though he kept my secret perfectly. He subtly nodded, asking if everything was all right. I pulled him aside. I need a favor, Wesley. I need background information on the Whitmore family. Anything you can find, business records, news articles, whatever is out there. I need it fast. Wesley didn't ask why. He simply nodded and disappeared, already on his phone. That efficiency was exactly why I paid him what I did. I returned to the party, trying to appear normal, which was increasingly difficult. That's when Sloane found me, gliding up to me, with a smile so sweet it felt dangerous. She suggested we chat, guiding me toward a secluded corner. The moment we were out of earshot, the mask dropped. I know about you, Rosalie, she stated, her voice sharp. She said. She knew I sent money home, every month, playing the good daughter from a distance. But why would someone who can barely afford their own apartment send money to a family that doesn't even like them? Unless you're trying to buy their love. Pathetic, really. She leaned closer, her eyes glittering. Garrett told me everything. How you were always jealous, how the family only tolerates you out of pity. I'm going to marry him, and honestly, it would be better for everyone if you just stayed away. Nobody will miss you. You are dead weight. She patted my arm patronizingly and walked away. I stood there, momentarily speechless. Sloane thought I was broke. She thought the money came from Garrett. She had absolutely no idea who I actually was, or that she was bragging about a rental car to the person who owned the entire dealership. If arrogance burned calories, Sloane would be invisible. Wesley appeared at my elbow, startling me from my thoughts. He handed me a thin folder. His usual calm was shaken. You need to see this, Ms. Burns, he whispered. They're not just in debt. They are being investigated for fraud. The tension in the ballroom tightened another notch, replaced by the grim reality of the documents, now in my hand. Wesley's pale face confirmed the severity of the contents of the folder. I needed absolute privacy, so I quickly took the file to my car in the parking garage. The overhead lights flickered, casting a stark illumination on the documents. I scanned the contents: financial records, court filings, news articles. The colder I felt, the clearer the picture became. The Whitmores were not who they claimed to be. Their supposed real estate empire was a house of cards, built entirely on deception and the theft of other people's money. They were 6 months away from bankruptcy and the full glare of a federal investigation. This wedding wasn't just about escaping debt. It was about securing an exit strategy. I could trace their twisted logic. They targeted Garrett, believing he represented a family with substantial, hidden assets. They intended to marry into the family, use the connection to stabilize their crumbling reputation, and drain whatever money they could before disappearing to start the con in a new location. What they didn't realize was the devastating truth. My family had no assets to drain. The house was mortgaged. Garrett's salary was average. The only money flowing into the Burns household came from me, and I could stop that flow with a single phone call. The Whitmores were about to discover they had targeted the wrong family, and when they did, they would abandon Garrett, leaving him heartbroken and my parents completely exposed and humiliated. A powerful internal debate began. A part of me, the hurt little sister, craved vindictive justice. Let them all suffer the consequences of their choices. My mother for giving away my inheritance, and my brother for his years of neglect. Let them feel what it was like to be discarded and overlooked. But I couldn't do it. As much as they had hurt me, they were still my family. Garrett was the boy who taught me to ride a bike. My mother was the woman who had stayed up all night when I was sick. Family is complicated. You can be furious with people and still feel the absolute necessity to protect them, even when they don't deserve it. I made a decision. I would expose the Whitmores. I would save my family from a disaster they didn't even know was approaching. And I would do it entirely on my own terms. I immediately called my lawyer, Rebecca Thornton. She answered on the second ring. I summarized the situation and asked her to quickly verify the official investigation status and the documents I had. She promised confirmation within the hour. Next, I called Naomi Delaney, a brilliant forensic accountant I had used before. I sent her photos of the key documents and tasked her with digging deeper, specifically for any records of aliases or multi-state fraud patterns. The stage was set, and the waiting was now the hardest part. I finished my calls, the car becoming my silent command center. 40 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Naomi, the forensic accountant. Her voice was tight with the specific excitement of someone who had just cracked a monumental case. You were right, Rosalie. Textbook Ponzi scheme, Naomi confirmed. But I looked up the name in other states. Arizona, 3 years ago. Same pattern, same scheme, different names. The bride's real name isn't Sloane. Are you ready for this? I told her I was. The bride is Sandra Williams, Naomi stated. The parents aren't even her real parents. They are partners in a long, running con. This has been their game for at least a decade. Different identities, different targets, same playbook. I sat there, the folder resting on my lap, and let out a brief, bitter laugh. These people had more identities than a repertory theater. Sandra, Sloane, and probably planning to be Stephanie next season. My phone buzzed with a text from Garrett. He wanted to know if we could talk, mentioning that something about Sloane felt wrong. I checked the time. 5 minutes until 9. The precise moment Franklin Whitmore was scheduled to make his grand welcome to the family toast. Too little, too late, big brother, I thought. You should have trusted that feeling years ago. But his doubt did confirm the effectiveness of the Whitmores. Facade was crumbling. I got out of the car, feeling a different energy than when I had arrived. Before, I was the invisible sister. Now, I was a woman with a plan and irrefutable evidence. Wesley met me near the service entrance. He had been watching the Whitmores all evening, and confirmed Franklin had made 4 increasingly agitated phone calls in the past hour. I told him I needed the AV system ready. I explained that during Franklin's toast, we were going to give the guests a presentation they would never forget. He didn't blink. He simply asked what kind of presentation. I handed him a USB drive. On it were the scanned copies of the most damaging documents, the Arizona court records, financial statements proving the fraud, and the photos of Sloane from 3 years ago, under her real name, Sandra Williams. When Franklin starts his toast, I want it all on the screens. I instructed. Every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. No mistakes. Wesley took the drive with a slight, almost eager smile. He said he always knew working for me would be interesting. But this was something else entirely. He then disappeared toward the control room. My phone buzzed again. Rebecca, my lawyer. Confirming the final details. She verified the federal investigation and, more importantly, confirmed she had contacted the lead investigator, Agent Carla Reeves, who had been trying to locate the Whitmores for months. Rebecca assured me Agent Reeves and her team would be outside the hotel by 9:15, ready to move in once the evidence was public. Everything was falling into place. The final trap was set, timed perfectly for the moment of their false triumph. Now, I just needed to wait for the clock to hit 9. The trap was sprung, and now I simply had to wait for the con artists to step into it. I found a position near the back of the ballroom, offering a clear view of the stage and the screens behind it. Sloane was working the room, the fake smile plastered on her face like heavy makeup. Garrett stood beside her, looking pleased and completely unaware that his life was about to be obliterated. My mother stood near the front, chatting with Delilah Whitmore, completely oblivious that one of them was a mark and the other was a scammer. I checked my watch, 8:56. Franklin Whitmore was already straightening his tie near the small stage. His salesman's confidence was back, firmly in place. He had no clue what was coming. I thought about Sloane calling me dead weight, and I smiled. People who underestimate you never see you rising. At 8:59, Franklin stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. The DJ lowered the music, and all the guests turned toward the stage, champagne glasses raised. I made eye contact with Wesley across the room. He gave me an imperceptible nod. The screens behind the stage flickered, currently displaying a warm slideshow of Garrett and Sloane staged happy photos. Happy couple at a fake restaurant. Happy couple at a rented beach. Happy couple living their happy lie. Not for much longer. Franklin cleared his throat and began his toast. "Good evening, everyone," he said, thanking them for celebrating this beautiful union. He spoke of family, of legacy, and how honored the Whitmores were to join the Burns family. He raised his glass. To the happy couple. To love, to family, to forever. I pulled out my phone and sent Wesley a single word. Now. The screens flickered once more. For a brief, confusing second, the crowd likely thought it was a technical glitch. The saccharine photos vanished, replaced by a court filing from Arizona, stamped and official. Franklin's smile froze mid-toast. The document was a fraud investigation, and listed as a person of interest was a name no one in the room knew: Sandra Williams. A murmuring ripple moved through the crowd. People squinted at the screens. Franklin fumbled with the microphone, his face draining of color. He shouted that there must be a mistake, calling it a technical error, and screamed toward the AV booth. But the screens kept changing. Another document appeared, financial records, showing investor money being funneled into shell companies. Then, news articles about a real estate scheme in Phoenix that had ruined dozens of families. Finally, a younger Sandra Williams, different hair, same cold eyes, standing with Franklin and Delilah, under different names entirely. Sloane stood frozen, her champagne glass trembling. Her mask had slipped completely, she looked utterly terrified. Garrett stared at the screens, then at Sloane, then back at the screens. The horrifying truth clicking into place. Franklin shoved through guests, attempting to flee. But two of my security staff subtly blocked his path. Delilah grabbed his arm, whispering frantically, but the escape was sealed. That was my moment. I walked through the parting crowd toward the stage, my boots clicking sharply on the marble floor. Every eye turned to me. The country girl, the nobody, the dead weight. Wesley's calm, professional voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the owner of the Monarch Hotel and CEO of Birch Hospitality, Miss Rosalie Burns." The silence that followed was total. My mother's face went white. Garrett's jaw dropped open. Even Sloane, mid-panic, looked genuinely shocked. I took the microphone from Franklin's limp hand. "Good evening, everyone," I said, looking directly at Sloane. I walked into my brother's engagement party. The bride whispered with a sneer, "The stinky country girl is here?" She didn't know I owned the hotel, or that the bride's family was about to learn it the bloody way. I gestured to the screens. Franklin and Delilah Whitmore are not who they claim to be. Their empire is a fraud. Their wealth is stolen. And their daughter, Sloane, is actually Sandra Williams, a con artist who has been running this scheme for over a decade. Sloane screamed that I was lying, that I was a jealous, pathetic nobody making this up, because I couldn't stand to see Garrett happy. I smiled at her. That's interesting. Did I also make up the federal investigation that has been following them for 2 years? And the arrest warrants issued last month in Arizona. As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened. 4 figures in dark suits walked in, badges visible, led by Agent Carla Reeves. Sloane's face crumbled. Franklin tried to bolt, but was intercepted by Agent Reeves, who placed a calm, firm hand on his shoulder. "Franklin Whitmore, or whatever your real name is, you are under arrest for wire fraud, investment fraud, and conspiracy." Delilah began to weep hysterically. Sloane turned to Garrett one last time, desperation etched on her face. "Garrett, are you really going to let your sister do this? We love each other. You have to believe me." Garrett looked at her, then back at the evidence, his expression broken. "He did something I never expected." He stepped away from her. "I don't even know who you are," he said, his voice quiet, certain. "I don't know who any of you are." Sloane's desperation instantly turned to pure rage. She lunged toward me, screaming that I had ruined everything, that I was supposed to be nobody. Just the stinky country girl. Security staff caught her before she could reach me. I leaned in close. "The stinky country girl owns the room you're standing in," I murmured. "And paid the salary of everyone who is about to escort you out." They led her away, screaming threats. Her entire carefully constructed life falling apart with every step toward the door. I turned back to the stunned guests. "The catering is already paid for," I announced. "And it seems a shame to waste good food. The bar stays open." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. The engagement party was over. The night was just beginning. The 3 con artists were swiftly escorted out of the Monarch in handcuffs. Sloane, or Sandra, was still screaming empty threats of lawsuits and revenge as she was put into the back of an unmarked car. She went from future Mrs. Burns to future inmate in minutes, a record even for a professional. Inside the ballroom, the shock began to give way to fascination as guests started sharing the unbelievable story. Garrett found me near the bar. He looked utterly devastated, like a man who had woken up from a years-long nightmare. His eyes were red, and his hands were unsteady. His entire worldview had shattered. "How did you know?" he managed, his voice cracking on the words. "How did you figure it all out?" "I listened, Garrett," I told him quietly. "I watched. I paid attention. All the things I've been doing my entire life, while everyone else chose to ignore me." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the melting ice sculpture. Then, he looked directly at me. "I'm sorry, Rosalie," he said. "I know that doesn't cover it. It doesn't cover years of treating you like an afterthought, years of believing Mom over you. But I am sorry." I studied his face, searching for any hint of manipulation, but all I saw was genuine, broken remorse. Perhaps for the first time in our lives, he truly saw me. "Sorry is a start," I conceded. We stood there in silence, 2 siblings who had been strangers for decades, finally seeing each other clearly through the wreckage. Then my mother, Patricia, appeared. The events of the evening seemed to have physically shrunk her. She approached slowly, uncertainly, her usual domineering confidence gone. She began to say she didn't know anything about the scam, but I cut her off gently. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screens, bank records, transfer receipts, 4 years of mortgage payments, utility bills, and medical expenses. All from Birch Hospitality. All from me. "You thought Garrett was supporting you," I told her, holding her gaze. "You bragged to everyone about your generous, successful son. I let that happen. But the truth is, it was me. It was always me." I let the implication hang in the air. "I didn't do it for thanks," I clarified. "I did it because you are my family, even when you made me feel like I wasn't yours. But you should know the truth about who was actually there for you." Patricia stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Her eyes filled with tears, not the dramatic, performative kind, but real, deep tears of shame and realization. She whispered my name, Rosalie, like she was tasting the word for the first time. Just then, there was a minor commotion near the dance floor. My grandmother's necklace, the antique pendant, was lying on the ground, where Sloane must have ripped it off during her meltdown. Garrett walked over and picked it up carefully. He returned to me, the necklace cradled in his palm. His voice was thick with emotion. "This was always supposed to be yours," he said. "I didn't know Mom gave it away. I'm sorry." He placed the necklace directly into my hand. The weight of the metal felt immediate and right. Like something that had been lost for years was finally home. Patricia watched the exchange, tears streaming down her face. "I have been so wrong about everything," she confessed. "I didn't press the point. There would be difficult, long conversations later. For now, the confrontation was over. The necessary truth had been spoken, and the rebuilding, however slow, could finally begin. 3 weeks later, I sat in my office at the Monarch Hotel, watching the morning sun stream across the city skyline. The Whitmores were finished. Federal prosecutors had enough evidence to charge Sandra Williams and her partners with multiple counts of serious fraud. Her bail was set high enough that even her fake wealthy parents could not afford it. The story had made local news for days. One headline even called me the stinky country girl who owned the room. I had that one framed and hung it where I could see it every morning. Garrett came to visit me at the hotel yesterday. It was the first time he had seen my spacious office, met my senior staff, and truly witnessed the life I had built without anyone's help. He walked around touching things, looking disoriented. "I spent years thinking I knew who you were, Rosalie," he admitted. "I was wrong about everything." I told him we both had a lot of years to make up for. "Maybe we should start now," I suggested. We went to a real lunch, not a strained family obligation. We actually talked about our childhood and all the meaningful things we had left unsaid. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, which was more than we had ever managed before. My mother started therapy last week. She called to tell me, her voice small and uncertain. Completely unlike the woman who had made me feel like a constant disappointment. She said she wanted to understand why she had treated me the way she did, and that she wanted to be better. I told her I appreciated the effort. Rebuilding trust takes time, but at least we were finally building something, instead of watching it crumble. This morning, I was hosting a business breakfast for investors and partners. Normal successful people discussing expansion opportunities. A nervous young woman walked in, looking overwhelmed by the elegance of the room. She was wearing simple clothes, clearly out of her element. One of my older investors, a man named Gerald, made a rude comment loud enough for everyone to hear, questioning who had let her into the private event. I stood up and walked over to the young woman, extending my hand warmly. "Nicole," I said. "I'm so glad you could make it." I then introduced her to the room. "Everyone, this is Nicole Patterson, this year's recipient of the Birch Hospitality Scholarship. She grew up in a small town in Ohio, worked 2 jobs to get through community college, and is starting at Cornell's hotel management program in the fall. The room went quiet. Gerald suddenly became engrossed in his coffee cup. I led Nicole to a seat at my table. She whispered a thank you, looking overwhelmed. "Don't thank me yet," I told her. "The real work is just starting. But if you ever feel like you don't belong somewhere, remember this. The people who built the most beautiful things usually started with nothing but stubbornness and dreams." After the breakfast, I stood in the lobby of my hotel, watching the traffic of people who walked on the floors I owned, sleeping in beds I paid for, completely unaware of the woman who made it all possible. And that was fine. I didn't need them to know. People will always try to make you feel small for where you came from. Let them. While they are busy looking down on you, they won't see you rising up. The stinky country girl had finally smelled the sweet scent of genuine, hard-won success. Kuantis all parts 7,000 words